The rain battered the city as a woman found a soaked wallet on the ground, unaware that it carried the most powerful name in town. Inside there was enough money to change her life, and the owner's identity was a surprise that made her heartbeat race. But when she decided to return what she had found, she didn't imagine she was stepping into a test devised by a distrustful billionaire. What begins as a simple act of honesty turns into a web of power, loyalty, and a dangerous invisible war between past and future. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. A fine, persistent rain was falling on the streets of London that Thursday afternoon, turning the asphalt into a mirror and soaking anyone who dared to walk without an umbrella. Megan hurried along Oxford Street, her blouse clinging to her body and her wet hair stuck to her face. She didn't have money for the bus, so she was walking the 3 miles that separated the neighborhood of Brixton, where she lived with her mother, from the Soho area, where she had a job. Interview scheduled at a small restaurant. It was her 13th interview in 3 weeks, and hope was beginning to weigh more heavily than exhaustion. At 26, Megan carried on her back a story that many only knew from the news: unemployment, overdue bills, a sick family, and the constant feeling of being one step away from having the electricity cut off. Mrs. Teresa, her mother, had diabetes and high blood pressure, and the medications consumed almost everything that was left of the benefits they received. The rent for their small flat on the 5th floor of a building with no lift was 3 months overdue, and the landlord had already warned that he wouldn't wait much longer. Megan wasn't one to complain. She grew up hearing from her mother that complaining solves nothing, that you have to hold your head up and move forward, and that's what she had done her whole life. She finished secondary school while working as a supermarket cashier, managed to take a technical course in administration on weekends, and for a few years she had a steady job at a small accounting firm. But the company closed down in the middle of the crisis, and since then Megan had been living off odd jobs. She sold homemade brownies outside schools, cleaned houses, did temporary work at events. Nothing that lasted, nothing that paid enough. That day, while dodging puddles and thinking about how she would explain to her mother that perhaps this interview wouldn't work out either, Megan nearly tripped over something lying in the middle of the pavement. It was a brown leather wallet, soaked by the rain, but visibly expensive. She looked around as if expecting someone to come running back for it, but the street was empty. Only cars sped by, kicking. Tharp curtains of dirty water. With her heart racing, Megan picked up the wallet from the ground and looked for a sheltered spot to open it. She stepped into the doorway of a closed shop and with trembling hands unfastened the clasp. What she saw took her breath away. Inside was an absurd amount of money in £50 notes, gold and platinum credit cards, documents, and amidst it all, a driver's license with a photo of a man with a serious expression and a piercing gaze. The name leaped off the paper as if written in letters of fire. Edward. Alistair. Megan knew that name. Everyone in London knew it. Edward Alistair was the owner of one of the country's largest corporations, Alistair Holdings, which controlled technology companies, construction firms, and, most notably, a medical foundation that funded cutting-edge research and maintained hospitals in several cities. He appeared in magazines, on television shows, always impeccable, always distant, always surrounded by security guards and assistants. And his wallet was there in her hands, wet and heavy as if it carried the entire world. Megan closed her eyes and felt the weight of temptation descend upon her shoulders like a lead cloak. That money would pay the overdue rent. It would buy her mother's medication for months. It would allow her a moment to breathe, a moment of peace, a chance to start over without the suffocating pressure of unpaid bills. No one would know. No one saw her pick up the wallet. She could simply take the money, throw the wallet in a bin and move on. But deep in her chest, something greater spoke louder. It was her mother's voice, repeated 1,000 times throughout her life. Honesty isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one is. It was the voice of her father, who had passed away so many years ago, but who had taught Megan to always look in the mirror without shame at what she saw reflected. It was the voice of her own conscience, which insisted on reminding her that she wasn't that person, that stealing wasn't the answer, that dignity was worth more than any £50 note. Megan put the wallet in her bag, took a deep breath, and changed her route. She was no longer going to the interview. She was going to return that wallet, and then she would deal with the consequences. She took out her old phone and searched for the address of the Alistair Holdings headquarters. It was in Canary Wharf, on the other side of the city. Another hour of walking in the rain. When she finally arrived at the building, she was completely drenched. The building was imposing, all mirrored glass, reflecting the grey clouds in the sky. Megan entered the main lobby and immediately felt the weight of the stairs. Two receptionists in impeccable uniforms looked her up and down, clearly judging her wet clothes, worn-out trainers, and dishevelled hair. One of them turned up her nose, the other crossed her arms. Megan approached the desk, feeling her face grow hot. I don't belong here, she thought, but she was there for a reason, and she wasn't going to give up. Good afternoon, she said, trying to sound firm. I need to speak with Mr. Edward Alistair. It's urgent. The younger receptionist let out a restrained chuckle. Mr. Alistair doesn't see anyone without an appointment, and with all due respect, I think you're in the wrong place. Megan felt anger rise, but she controlled herself. She took the wallet out of her bag and placed it on the counter. I found this on the street. I need to return it personally. The two women glanced at each other, surprised. The older one took the wallet, opened it quickly, and turned pale upon recognizing the documents. Without a word, she picked up the internal phone and dialed quickly. She murmured something quietly, glanced at Megan out of the corner of her eye, and after a few seconds, hung up. You'll go up to the 40th floor. Someone will meet you at the lift. Megan nodded and headed for the lifts, feeling her heart beat faster and faster. The doors opened with a soft chime and she stepped inside. The mirror inside the lift reflected her drenched image, and she tried to fix her hair with her hands, but it was useless. When the doors opened again, a middle-aged woman dressed in a grey suit and thin-framed glasses was waiting for her with a neutral expression. Follow me, the woman said, without introductions. Megan obeyed in silence. They walked through wide, quiet corridors with modern art on the walls and a carpet so soft that her steps made no sound. The woman stopped in front of a double door of dark wood, knocked twice, and without waiting for a response pushed the door open. The office was enormous. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, a mahogany desk that looked hand-carved, shelves filled with books and trophies, and at the center of it all, sitting in a black leather chair, was him, Edward Alistair. He looked up from his computer and fixed his gaze on Megan. He was a man in his early 40s, with dark hair and greying temples, broad shoulders, an erect posture and an expression that seemed capable of deciphering secrets just by observing. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit without a single wrinkle, and his eyes were a deep brown that seemed to see right through people. Mr. Alistair, this young woman found your wallet, said the assistant, handing the object to him. Edward took the wallet, opened it, checked the contents, and for the first time, something in his expression changed. It wasn't quite surprise, but something close to curiosity. Thank you, he said, his voice deep and controlled. He gestured to the assistant who left the room and closed the door behind her. Edward then stood up and walked over to Megan, who remained standing in the middle of the room, dripping water onto the carpet. Where did you find this? On the pavement on Oxford Street, near the Tottenham Court Road tube station, Megan replied, trying not to stammer. And everything is here. Money, cards, documents, he continued, still looking at her with that unsettling intensity. Why didn't you take anything? The question caught Megan by surprise. She blinked, confused. Because it's not mine. Edward let out a sound that could have been a laugh or just air being released. Because it's not yours. Simple as that. Simple as that, Megan repeated, feeling there was something strange about this conversation. He went back behind his desk, but didn't sit down. He picked up the internal phone and asked for his next appointments to be cancelled for half an hour. Then he pointed to a chair in front of the desk. Sit. Megan hesitated. I don't want to disturb you. I just came to return it. I know, but now I want to talk to you. Sit. It wasn't a request. It was an order, spoken with the calmness of someone used to being obeyed. Megan sat down, clasping her hands in her lap and trying not to soak the expensive chair too much. What's your name? Megan. Megan Smith. And what do you do, Megan Smith? She swallowed hard. At the moment, nothing. I'm unemployed. Edward finally sat down, leaning back in his chair and studying Megan as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve. And you need money. Everyone needs money, Mr. Alistair. True. But you, specifically, need it badly. I can see it in your wet clothes because you don't have money for the bus, in your worn shoes, in the way you looked at this room as if it were from another planet. And yet you returned a wallet full of money. Megan felt her face burn. I'm not a thief. I know, and that's precisely why you're here. He opened a drawer, took out a business card, and placed it on the desk, pushing it towards Megan. I need a personal assistant, someone organized, trustworthy, who can handle pressure, and who, above all, has integrity. The salary is good, the benefits too. You start on Monday. Megan picked up the card, looked at it, and then at Edward, incredulous. Are you offering me a job? I am. But you don't know me, you know nothing about me. I know enough. You returned my wallet when you could have just kept the money. That tells me more about you than any CV ever could. Megan felt a strange mix of relief, suspicion and anger in her chest. And what if I say I don't want the job? Edward raised an eyebrow. Are you saying you don't want it? I'm saying this is strange. You lose a wallet, I return it, and suddenly I get a job. It sounds too good to be true. He smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. You're suspicious, that's good. It means you're not naive, but let me be clear. I didn't lose the wallet by accident. I dropped it on purpose. Megan felt as if a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over her. What? It's a test I run from time to time. I drop my wallet in different parts of the city and wait to see who returns it, who keeps the money, who ignores it. You returned it. That interests me. The anger Megan had been holding back exploded. She stood up from the chair, throwing the business card back onto the desk. So this was all a game. You play with people's desperation for your own amusement? You test who's honest and who's not, like it's some kind of lab experiment? Edward remained impassive. It's a way of ensuring I'm surrounded by trustworthy people. It's a way of being cruel, Megan retorted, her voice trembling with indignation. I walked for miles in the rain to return this wallet because I thought it was the right thing to do, and now I find out it was all a lie that you were playing with me. Do you know how that makes me feel? Like an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're exactly the kind of person I need. Then you need to look elsewhere, because I don't want to work for someone like that. Megan grabbed her bag and walked to the door. Megan. She stopped but didn't turn around. The job is real. The offer is real. Think about it. There's nothing to think about. Megan left the office, walked past the assistant who looked at her in surprise, got into the lift and pressed the ground. Floor button hard. The tears began to fall before the doors even closed. They weren't tears of sadness but of pure frustration. She had done the right thing. She had returned the wallet. And in return, she discovered she had been used as a guinea pig in an experiment by a rich man who thought he could play with people's lives. When she got home late that night, after walking once more through the city under the relentless rain, she found Mrs. Teresa sitting in the living room, with the nebulizer running beside her. Her mother looked at her with concern. My dear, you're soaked. Where have you been? Megan sat down next to her mother, too tired to invent an excuse. She told her everything. The wallet, the building, the job offer, the revelation of the test. Mrs. Teresa listened in silence, holding her daughter's hand. And you turned down the job, her mother said, not as a question, but as a statement. I did. I can't work for someone like that. Mrs. Teresa sighed. My daughter, I raised you to be honest, to have dignity. And you do. But life also requires us to be practical. This man offered you an opportunity. It doesn't matter how it came about. What matters is that it's there. But, Mum, he used me. He tested you and you passed. Now he wants to give you a job. How many interviews have you had this month? How many doors have been slammed in your face? You can have your pride, Megan, but pride doesn't pay the rent. Pride doesn't buy medicine. Megan lowered her head, feeling the weight of her mother's words. She knew Mrs. Teresa was right. She knew she was out of options. But the idea of going back to that building, to that man, to that humiliation, hurt like an open wound. Think carefully, my dear. Think about yourself, but also think about me. I won't be around forever. I want to see you settled before I go. Don't talk like that, Mum, Megan whispered, squeezing her mother's frail hand. That night, Megan couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the rain against the window, thinking about everything that had happened. She thought about the wet wallet, the piercing eyes of Edward Alistair, her mother's words. She thought about the pile of bills on the kitchen table, the eviction notice that could arrive at any moment, the prescription that would expire in a few days. The next morning, with the sun finally appearing after days of rain, Megan took the business card she had tucked away in the bottom of her bag, took a deep breath and dialed the number. The voice that answered on the other end of the line was that of the assistant who had taken Megan to Edward's office the day before. She introduced herself as Sonia and, in a professional and cold tone, confirmed that Mr. Alistair was expecting her call. She scheduled for Megan to come in on Monday at 8 in the morning to officially start as his personal assistant. She hung up before Megan could change her mind. Mrs. Teresa hugged her daughter when she heard the decision, and for the first time in months, Megan saw a glimmer of hope in her mother's tired eyes. In the following days, she used the little money she had saved to buy a more presentable outfit: simple black trousers, a white shirt, and a pair of closed-toe shoes that weren't so worn. It wasn't luxury, but it was dignified. She wanted to make a good start, even if inside she still felt that discomfort when she remembered how it had all happened. On Monday, Megan arrived at the Alistair Holdings headquarters 15 minutes early. This time she wasn't drenched, and the receptionists treated her with a little more respect, although there was still that air of superiority in their gazes. Sonia was waiting for her in the lobby and led her again to the 40th floor, but this time, instead of going straight to Edward's office, she was taken to a smaller room with a desk, a new computer, and an empty bookshelf. "This is your workstation," Sonia explained, opening folders and showing documents. "You will be responsible for Mr. Alistair's schedule, filtering calls, organizing meetings, preparing reports, and accompanying him to events when necessary. He is extremely punctual and does not tolerate mistakes. If you have questions, ask before you act. If you make a mistake, admit it immediately. He values honesty above all else." Megan absorbed every word, trying to commit everything to memory. Sonia was brisk, objective, and made it clear she wasn't there to make friends. After spending nearly 2 hours explaining procedures, systems, and protocols, she finally took Megan to Edward's office. He was on the phone speaking in English to someone about a corporate merger negotiation. He gestured for Megan to sit and continued the conversation for a few more minutes. When he hung up, he turned to her with that same indecipherable expression. "You came." "I came," Megan replied, keeping her voice steady. "And you accept to work for me." "I do, but not because I agree with your methods. I accept because I have to." Edward tilted his head as if evaluating her response. "Honesty again. Good. Then let's establish some rules. First, I expect efficiency. Second, I expect loyalty. Third, I expect you to tell me the truth always, even if it's not what I want to hear. Can you do that?" "I can." "Excellent. Sonia will give you everything you need to know. If you have any problems, speak to me directly. I don't like intermediaries." Megan nodded and left the office, feeling a mix of relief and tension. The first few days were intense. Edward's routine was exhausting. He arrived at 7 in the morning and rarely left before 9 at night. Meetings followed one after. Another without a break. International calls happened at all hours, and Megan needed to be constantly one step ahead, anticipating what he would need before he even asked. But the work wasn't the worst part. It was the environment. Within the first few days, Megan realized her presence caused discomfort. Employees whispered as she walked down the corridors. Curious and malicious glances followed her. One morning, as she got into the lift, she heard 2 women commenting quietly, "That's her. The one who appeared out of nowhere and became the CEO's assistant. I bet there's more to that story." Megan pretended not to hear, but the words echoed in her head all day. It was at the end of the first week that she met Richard. He appeared in Megan's office without warning, introduced himself as the supervisor of compliance and internal security, and said he needed to ask some routine questions. He sat in the chair opposite her desk, crossed his arms, and began the interrogation. "You have a qualification in administration, correct?" "A technical course. I didn't finish university." "And before you came here, where did you work?" "At an accounting firm that closed down. After that, I did some temporary jobs." Richard noted everything on a tablet without taking his eyes off her. "And how exactly did you get this job?" Megan took a deep breath, feeling her irritation grow. "I returned a wallet I found on the street. Mr. Alistair offered me the job." "Convenient." "Convenient?" "A stranger with no strong CV gets direct access to the company's CEO and is hired on the spot. Don't you find that strange?" "I think that's none of your business." Richard smiled, but it was a humorless smile. "It is my business. My job is to ensure there are no people with questionable intentions near Mr. Alistair. He trusts too easily, and trust can be dangerous. If he trusts me, that's his problem. And if you have an accusation to make it directly." "Not yet, but I'll be watching." He left the office, leaving Megan with a racing heart and hands trembling with anger. The feeling of being watched, judged, and discredited was suffocating. But she couldn't give up. Not now, when she had finally managed to pay the overdue rent and buy her mother's medication without having to pay in 3 installments. In the following weeks, Edward began to reveal a different side. He took her to see the Alistair Foundation, a hospital and research complex in South Kensington that funded treatments for people who couldn't afford to pay. Megan saw children being treated, patients receiving expensive drugs for free, doctors working on research that could save thousands of lives. Edward walked through the corridors as if he were at home, greeting nurses by name, stopping to talk with patients, checking reports with coordinators. "This is where the money really matters," he told Megan, as they watched a surgical team perform a complex procedure through a window. "Not in endless meetings or corporate negotiations here." "Why is the foundation so important to you?" Megan asked, curious. Edward was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, there was something different in his voice, something softer, more vulnerable. "Because I lost someone who could have been saved if she'd had access to the right treatment at the right time." Megan didn't press. She knew there was pain in those words, and that forcing the conversation would be invading a territory he wasn't ready to share. But it was on a Friday afternoon, almost a month after Megan had started working, that Edward finally opened the door to that past. He called her into his office after everyone else had gone home, and when Megan entered, she found him sitting in the armchair by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a tired expression on his face. "Sit," he said, pointing to the armchair next to him. Megan obeyed, intrigued. Edward had never called her to talk like this, so informally. "I want to show you something," he said, taking out his phone and searching for something. After a few seconds, he turned the screen towards her. It was a video. The image showed a beautiful woman with long hair and a gentle smile sitting in a hospital room. She was visibly frail, but her eyes shone as she spoke to the camera. "Edward, my love, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And I know you're alone, blaming yourself, closing yourself off from the world. But I need you to listen to me. Don't let fear consume you. Don't let the pain turn you into someone who is just going through the motions. You have so much to offer, so much love to give. I want you to find someone. I want you to trust again. I want you to be happy again. Promise me?" The woman in the video coughed, wiped away a tear, and smiled again. "I love you. I will always love you. But now it's time for you to move on. Please, Edward. For me." The video ended, and the silence that followed was heavy. Megan felt her own tears streaming down her face, unable to control them. Edward turned off the phone and stared at the glass of whiskey, as if the answers were at the bottom, of the amber liquid. "Her name was Helen," he said, his voice hoarse. "We met at university. We married young. We were happy, until she started feeling pain. We did tests, more tests, and when they finally figured out what it was already too advanced. Cancer. Aggressive. Fast. He took a sip of the whiskey and continued. I had money. I had contacts. I got the best doctors, the most modern treatments. But it wasn't enough. Helen left me 5 years ago, and since then, I haven't trusted anyone. Because everyone around me failed. The doctors failed. I failed. And I realized that people lie. They lie to protect, to please, to get what they want. That's why I started doing the tests. I needed to know who was truly honest. Megan swallowed hard, still processing everything she had just heard. And I passed the test. You passed. And since you've been here, you've been the only person who doesn't try to please me, who tells the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, who does her job without expecting recognition. Do you know how rare that is? I just do what's right. Edward finally looked her in the eyes. And that's why I trust you. More than I've trusted anyone in years. Megan felt something shift in that moment. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just a professional relationship. There was a connection, a mutual respect that was forming. And for the first time since she had entered that building, Megan felt like she belonged there. But the peace was short-lived. The following Monday, when Megan arrived at work, there was an unusual buzz on the floor. Employees were gathered in groups, speaking quietly and looking at their phone screens. Sonia walked past her with a stern face and entered Edward's office without knocking. Megan felt a tightness in her chest. She opened her phone and saw she was being bombarded with messages. She opened one and felt the ground disappear from under her feet. It was a link to a newspaper article. The headline read, Alistair Foundation under suspicion of embezzlement. New assistant hired without experience raises questions about transparency. Megan read the article with trembling hands. The text insinuated that the foundation was being investigated for financial irregularities, and that the sudden hiring of an unknown assistant with no relevant CV was an attempt to distract public opinion, or worse, a piece in the embezzlement scheme. There was a long-distance photo of her entering the building and a description that made her look like a shameless opportunist. She didn't have time to process it all. The door to Edward's office opened, and Sonia summoned her with a curt gesture. Megan went in and found Edward standing, reading the same article on his computer. His face was grim, but it wasn't anger directed at her. It was restrained anger, the kind that burns from within. This is slander, he said, his voice low and controlled. There is no investigation. There is no embezzlement. Someone planted this story to hurt me. But why? Who would do that? Megan asked. I have a few enemies, people who lost deals to me, competitors who want to bring down the foundation. But to use you to do it, he clenched his fists. That's low. And what do I do? Edward took a deep breath. You do nothing. I'll get the legal team on it. I'll demand a retraction, and I'll find out who's behind this. In the meantime, you continue working as normal. Don't let this affect you. But it was impossible not to be affected. Throughout the week, Megan felt the stares grow heavier, the comments sharper. Richard appeared again, this time with a poorly concealed air of satisfaction, saying that perhaps it would be best for her to take a leave of absence until things calmed down. Megan refused firmly, but inside she felt like she was being slowly crushed. It was on the Friday of that week that a woman appeared at reception asking to speak with Megan. Sonia buzzed through, and Megan went down to the lobby, curious and apprehensive. The woman waiting for her was elegant, dressed in an immaculate white suit, with perfectly styled blonde hair, discreet makeup, and a designer handbag hanging from her arm. She smiled when she saw Megan, but it was a cold, calculated smile. You're Megan, right? Edward's new assistant. I am. And you are? Vivian Carter. Edward and I were engaged. We're still very close. Megan felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the way Vivian looked at her that was both condescending and threatening. What do you want? Vivian took a step closer, lowering her voice. I came to make you a proposal. I know you're going through a tough time. I know you're being attacked in the media. It must be horrible, mustn't it? So I'll make things easier for you. I'll pay you to leave this company and never come back. It's a generous amount, enough for you to start a new life somewhere else. Megan felt her anger rise. Are you offering me money to quit my job? I'm offering you a graceful exit. Edward is a vulnerable man, Megan. He's suffered a lot, and people like you who appear out of nowhere take advantage of that vulnerability. I won't allow that to happen. I'm not taking advantage of anything. I'm working. Vivian smiled again, but this time there was contempt in her smile. Of course you are. But let me give you some advice. Edward doesn't tolerate failure, and when something goes wrong, and it will, he will discard you without a second thought. So accept my offer while you still can. I don't accept. Vivian sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Fine. But remember, I warned you. She turned and left the building, leaving Megan standing in the lobby, her heart pounding and her mind in turmoil. She went back up to her floor, and as soon as she entered her office, saw Edward standing by her desk, looking out the window. He turned as he heard her enter. I just saw Vivian leaving the building. What did she want? Megan hesitated, but she remembered the promise she had made to always tell the truth. She offered me money to leave the company. Edward's face hardened. And you? I refused. He nodded slowly, as if processing the information. Vivian can't accept that we broke up. She thinks she still has some control over my life, but she doesn't. And if she approaches you again, you tell me immediately. I will. Edward walked to the door but stopped before leaving. Megan, I know this is difficult, but I'm not going to abandon you. You're here because I trust you, and that's not going to change. When he left, Megan sat down in her chair and let out the breath she had been holding. The situation was getting more complicated than she had imagined, and she had a feeling that this was only the beginning. The following week brought a development that would completely change the course of events. Edward received an invitation to an international Alistair Foundation event in Manchester, bringing together doctors, researchers, and investors from various countries. It was an important opportunity to present the results of the research funded by the foundation and to secure new supporters. And to Megan's surprise, Edward insisted that she accompany him. I need you there to record contacts, take notes at meetings, and help me organize the schedule, he explained, while reviewing the event program on his computer. It's going to be intense. 3 straight days of lectures, dinners, and meetings. Can you prepare for that? Megan nodded, though inside she felt a knot in her stomach. She had never traveled for work. In fact, she had never traveled anywhere beyond the towns neighboring London. The idea of going to Manchester, staying in a hotel, participating in an event of that scale, was both exciting and terrifying. Sonia took care of all the arrangements: plane tickets, accommodation in a 5-star hotel near the convention centre, transport, and a detailed list of everything Megan would need to do during the event. Richard, as usual, showed up to make his venomous remarks. Interesting how you've risen so quickly, he said, leaning against the doorway of Megan's office. 2 months ago you were unemployed. Now you're travelling to international events alongside the CEO. You must be very talented. Megan stared at him without looking away. If you have something to say, Richard, just say it. I'm tired of these insinuations. They're not insinuations, they're observations, and my job is to observe. Then observe in silence. He smirked, but left the office without another word. Megan returned to her work, but the unease lingered. She had a feeling she was being set up for a fall, but she didn't know where the blow would come from. The trip took place on a Tuesday. Megan woke before sunrise, packed her suitcase with the few presentable clothes she owned, and said goodbye to her mother, who hugged her tightly and whispered words of encouragement. At the airport, she found Edward already waiting in the executive lounge, dressed impeccably as always, reviewing documents on his tablet. He greeted Megan with a nod and returned to his work. The flight was smooth. Edward worked the entire journey, and Megan took the opportunity to review the event schedule and familiarize herself with the names of the most important attendees. When they arrived in Manchester, a car was already waiting and they went straight to the hotel. Megan was impressed by the grandeur of the place: marble everywhere, enormous chandeliers, staff in pristine uniforms. Her room was larger than the flat she shared with her mother. The event began that same afternoon. The convention center was filled with elegant people, speaking various languages, circulating with glasses of wine, and greeting each other with professional smiles. Meghan followed Edward discreetly, taking notes, snapping photos of exhibitors, passing on business cards. He was a magnetic figure. Wherever he went, he drew attention. People wanted to talk to him, wanted photos, wanted promises of funding. During one of the breaks, while Meghan was in the convention center's outdoor garden reviewing her notes for the day, a woman approached. She wore a striking red dress and had a rehearsed smile on her face. It took Meghan a few seconds to recognize her. It was Vivian. "What a coincidence finding you here," Vivian said, though it was obvious there was nothing coincidental about it. "What do you want?" Meghan asked, not hiding her irritation. "I came to give you another chance. My offer still stands. In fact, I'll increase it. You can walk away from this now with enough money to start a new life, or you can stay and watch everything fall apart around you. Because it will fall apart, Meghan. Edward doesn't tolerate failure. And you are going to fail." "How can you be so sure?" Vivian moved closer, lowering her voice. "Because I'm going to make sure you fail." Before Meghan could respond, Vivian walked away, disappearing among the guests. Meghan stood frozen, her heart beating erratically. That wasn't just an empty threat. Vivian was planning something, and Meghan had no idea how to protect herself. That same evening, during a gala dinner in the hotel's main ballroom, the first incident occurred. Meghan was seated at a table near Edward's, observing everything and making sure he had everything he needed. The lights were low, the ambient music was soft, and everything seemed to be running perfectly, until suddenly the lights flickered and went out completely. The ballroom plunged into darkness. There were screams, confusion, the sound of breaking glasses. It took almost a minute for the emergency lights to come on, and when focus was finally restored, the atmosphere was tense. The event organizers apologized, explaining there had been a technical fault and promised the problem would be resolved quickly. But the damage was already done. Rumors began to circulate. Someone commented they had seen strange activity near the electrical panel. Another said there were cameras recording everything, and they would soon know who was responsible. And somehow, Meghan's name began to pop up in conversations. Someone saw her near the corridor leading to the technical area. Someone found it strange that a new assistant was at such a high-profile event. Meghan felt paranoia creeping in. She found Edward, who was talking with a group of doctors, and waited until he could give her his attention. "Did something happen?" he asked, noticing the worried expression on her face. "People are talking. They're saying I was near the electrical panel before the blackout." Edward frowned. "And were you?" "No, I was in the garden. But I have no way to prove it." He placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture from him. "Don't worry. I'll request a technical audit. This will be cleared up." But the reassurance he tried to offer wasn't enough to calm the panic Meghan felt. She returned to her hotel room later, exhausted and frightened. She couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how everything was spinning out of control. The next morning, the situation worsened. When Meghan went down for breakfast, she noticed people looking at her differently. They were whispering, pointing. She picked up a tray and sat at an empty table, trying to ignore the stares. But when Edward appeared and sat next to her, the tension in the room became palpable. "Are you all right?" he asked, pouring himself some coffee. "I'm trying," Meghan replied, picking at her toast without an appetite. "I found out who spread the rumor about you being near the electrical panel." Meghan looked up, surprised. "Who?" "Vivian. She told several people she saw you in the technical corridor. Obviously she lied, because the cameras show you were in the garden the whole time. But the information has already spread." Meghan felt her anger boil. "Why is she doing this?" "Because she wants to destroy me, and using you is the easiest way to do it. She knows I trust you. If she can discredit you, she can undermine that trust." "Is it working?" Edward looked her in the eyes, serious. "No, but it's making me furious." After breakfast, Edward had a series of scheduled meetings, and Meghan accompanied him, doing her job with her usual efficiency. But in the middle of the afternoon, while she was alone reviewing documents in an empty meeting room, someone entered. It was Vivian. "You don't give up, do you?" Vivian said, closing the door behind her. "I could say the same about you," Megan replied, standing up. "You know, Megan, I almost admire your stubbornness, but it's a foolish stubbornness. Do you really think Edward will keep defending you? He cuts off anyone who becomes a problem. I've seen it happen. And you are becoming a big problem. I haven't done anything wrong, but people think you have, and in his world, perception is reality. So accept my offer before it's too late." Megan took a step forward, facing Vivian as an equal. "I won't take money from someone like you, and I won't quit my job because of threats. If you want to destroy me, you're going to have to try a lot harder." Vivian smiled, but it was a dangerous smile. "You asked for She left the room and Megan felt a chill. She knew she had just declared war, but she couldn't go back, not after everything she had built. If you were in Megan's place, would you have taken Vivian's money to avoid more trouble? Or would you have done what she did and faced the situation head-on? Tell us in the comments. On the last day of the event, the worst happened. During an important lecture on advances in cancer research, the presentation screens froze. The technicians tried to fix it, but the system was completely compromised. Someone had sabotaged the files, deleting important data and causing a huge embarrassment. Edward was on stage trying to handle the situation professionally, but it was clear he was furious. After the disastrous lecture, he called an emergency meeting with the security team and the event organizers. Megan was present, sitting in a corner of the room, watching everything with a knot in her stomach. The security cameras were reviewed, and what appeared on the footage made Megan's blood run cold. There was a person entering the technical control room the previous night, wearing a hooded navy blue coat. The image didn't clearly show the face, but it showed the silhouette. And that silhouette was very similar to Megan's. Richard, who was also at the meeting, didn't miss the opportunity. "Mr. Alistair, with all due respect, but I think it's time to admit that your trust was misplaced. This woman appeared out of nowhere, has caused problems from the beginning, and now this. The evidence is right there." Edward looked at the screen, then at Megan, then back at the screen. His face was unreadable. "Megan, were you in that room?" "No, sir. I was in my room. I called my mother around 10 o'clock, she can confirm. And the coat? I have a similar coat, but I left it in the wardrobe in my room." Richard crossed his arms. "Convenient." Edward raised his hand, signaling for silence. "I want you to review the footage from the hotel corridor. I want to know who entered and left the rooms that night, and I want you to check if there are any other cameras that show this person more clearly. Until then, no one makes any accusations." The meeting ended, but the tension remained. Megan left the room feeling suffocated. She went back to her room, locked the door, and threw herself on the bed, finally letting the tears fall. She was being framed for something she didn't do, and the worst part was, she didn't know how to prove her innocence. A knock on the door made her get up. She quickly wiped her face and went to answer it. It was Edward. "May I come in?" Megan nodded, stepping aside to let him pass. Edward entered, closed the door behind him, and stood in the middle of the room, as if searching for the right words. "I believe you," he said finally. Megan felt the tears well up again. "How can you be sure? The footage can be misleading, but I know you, Megan. I know what you're capable of and what you're not, and I know you wouldn't do this. Richard doesn't think so. Neither do half the people at that event. Richard is paid to be suspicious, and the people at the event don't know you. But I do, and I'm going to prove you're innocent. And what if you can't?" Edward came closer, and for the first time since they had met, he touched her face gently. "I will. Trust me." Megan nodded, holding his hand for a brief moment before he pulled away. When Edward left the room, she sat on the bed and took a deep breath. She knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, she felt she wasn't alone. The next morning, they returned to London. The atmosphere on the plane was heavy. Edward worked in silence, and Megan pretended to read a book, but her mind was elsewhere. When they finally arrived at the company headquarters, news of the incident in Manchester had already spread. The employees looked at Megan with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and even pity. Richard was waiting for her at reception with an expression like he'd just won the lottery. "Megan, I need you to come with me. The compliance department needs to ask some questions." "I'm coming too," Edward said, interrupting before Richard could object. The three of them went up to a meeting room where two more people from the legal department were waiting. Richard began the interrogation, asking questions about where Megan was at every moment of the event, who she talked to, what she did. Megan answered everything calmly, though inside she was trembling. Then Richard threw a photo onto the table. It was an enlarged image of the person entering the technical control room. He pointed to the coat. "Is this coat yours?" "It's similar, but I can't confirm it's mine. Many people have coats like that." "But you admit you have an identical coat?" "Yes." "And where was this coat on the night of the incident?" "In the wardrobe in my room." "Can anyone confirm that?" Megan hesitated. "No, I was alone." Richard smiled. "So there's no way to prove you didn't take the coat, go to the technical room, sabotage the system, and return to your room?" Edward slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Enough! You're making accusations without proof. The hotel cameras will clear this up. Until then, this meeting is over." Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Edward was already getting up, pulling Megan by the arm and leaving the room. When they reached the corridor, he stopped and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry about that." "It wasn't your fault," Megan said, her voice weak. "Yes, it was. I put you in this situation. I should have realized something like this could happen. You couldn't have known." Edward looked at her with an intensity that made Megan's heart race. "I will find out who is behind this, and I will make them pay." In the following days, Edward kept his promise. He hired private investigators, demanded that the hotel release all camera recordings, and pressured the event organizers to cooperate. And finally, the evidence began to emerge. The hotel cameras showed someone entering Megan's room on the afternoon before the incident. This person was wearing a housekeeper's uniform, but upon enlarging the image, it was clear she was not a hotel employee. It was Vivian. Other footage showed Vivian taking the coat from Megan's wardrobe, putting it on, and leaving the room. Later, the convention center cameras captured the same person entering the technical room and sabotaging the equipment. Afterwards, Vivian returned to Megan's room, put the coat back, and disappeared. When Edward presented this evidence in a meeting with the legal department, Richard turned pale. The two people from compliance offered formal apologies to Megan, and Edward, his voice as cold as ice, announced that Vivian would be sued for sabotage, defamation, and breaking and entering. Megan felt such immense relief that she almost collapsed right there, but she held herself together. She had been through the fire, tested in every possible way, and she had survived. More than that, she had proven to herself and to everyone that she was exactly who she said she was. The revelation of the truth about the sabotage caused an earthquake at Alistair Holdings. The news spread quickly through the company corridors, and this time the looks directed at Megan were different. There was no longer suspicion, but something close to respect and even admiration. She had been unjustly accused, attacked in every possible way, and yet she had remained steadfast. That said something about her character. Richard was one of the first to approach her. He entered her office with his tail between his legs, clearly embarrassed, and offered a formal apology. Megan listened to him in silence, and when he finished, she simply nodded. She held no grudge. She understood he was just doing his job, albeit overzealously. "I was wrong," Richard said, his voice low. "I let my suspicion blind me. You didn't deserve that." "I didn't," Megan agreed. "But I understand you were trying to protect the company. I just hope that next time you look for all the evidence before accusing someone." Richard nodded and left the room. Megan returned to her work, but she felt that something had changed within her. She had been through a trial by fire and had come out transformed. She was stronger, more confident, more aware of her own worth. Edward, for his part, was determined to see justice done. He sued Vivian not only for the crimes she had committed, but also for all the times she had tried to manipulate and control his life. The process was long and painful, bringing to light details of their relationship that Edward would have preferred to keep buried. But he pressed on because he knew it was necessary. During one of the hearings, Vivian finally confessed everything. She admitted she had never gotten over the end of their engagement, that she saw Megan as a threat to her chances of winning Edward back, and that she had orchestrated the entire sabotage plan with the help of people she had hired. She admitted to planting the defamatory article in the newspaper, spreading rumors within the company, breaking into Megan's hotel room, and using her coat to frame her. "I just wanted you to come back to me," Vivian said, looking at Edward with tears in her eyes. "I loved you. I still do. But you forgot me. You replaced me with her." Edward looked at her without a drop of compassion. "You never loved me, Vivian. You loved what I represented, the power, the money, the status. Megan never wanted any of that. She just wanted to do her job and live with dignity. And that's why I trust her, and not you." Vivian was sentenced to pay a heavy fine and to perform community service. She was also issued a restraining order, forbidding her from approaching Edward or Megan. When she left the courthouse, she was visibly broken, but Megan felt no pity. She only felt relief that this chapter was finally coming to an end. In the following months, life at Alistair Holdings returned to normal. Megan continued to work as Edward's personal assistant, and her reputation within the company grew. People respected her, they trusted her, and she, in turn, continued to do her job with the same dedication as always. But something else was happening between her and Edward, something that neither of them wanted to admit, but which was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. Their gazes lingered longer. Their conversations stretched beyond what was necessary. The casual touches, an arm brushing against another while passing through a doorway, a hand resting on a shoulder during a difficult conversation, carried an electric charge that made both their hearts race. It was during a weekend, when Edward invited Megan to accompany him on a visit to the Alistair Foundation, that everything changed. They were walking through the gardens of the hospital complex, watching the children play in the recreation area, when Edward finally spoke about Helen. "She loved this place," he said, stopping near a wooden bench under a tree. "We would spend hours here talking about the projects, about how we could help more people. Helen had such a clear vision of what she wanted to do with her life, and when she was gone, I thought I had lost that vision too." Megan sat on the bench beside him, waiting for him to continue. "But you reminded me," Edward went on, looking at his hands. "You reminded me what it's like to have someone by your side who believes in what you do, who supports you without expecting anything in return, who challenges you when necessary. Helen used to say I needed to find someone like that. And I did. I found you." Megan felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Edward!" He looked at her, and there was so much vulnerability in his gaze that Megan felt her heart ache. "I don't know if this is right. I don't know if it's too soon, or if I'm betraying Helen's memory. But what I do know is that you've changed my life, Megan. You made me believe in people again. You made me feel again." "And what do you feel?" Edward took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I feel that you are the most honest and courageous person I have ever met. I feel that I trust you more than I've trusted anyone else. And I feel that I'm falling in love with you." Megan let the tears fall freely. "I'm falling in love with you too. Since the first day, when I walked into that office and you looked at me like you were trying to solve a riddle. But I was afraid. Afraid it was just gratitude or dependency or something else that wasn't real." "It's real," Edward said, bringing his face closer to hers. "I promise you, it's real." They kissed there, under the tree, with the afternoon sun illuminating the gardens and the distant sound of children playing. It was a gentle kiss, filled with promises and hopes, a kiss that sealed something that had been built over months of trials, challenges, and triumphs. When they parted, Edward smiled. It was a real smile, full of warmth, so different from the cold smile Megan had seen on that first day. Helen would be happy. She always wanted me to find someone who would make me smile again. "Then I guess I'm doing a good job," Megan said, smiling too. "You're doing an excellent job." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, planning, dreaming. They talked about the future of the foundation, about the projects they wanted to develop, about how they could expand their reach and help more people. Megan shared ideas she had kept to herself, suggestions on how to make processes more efficient, ways to reach communities that still lacked access to their services. Edward listened intently, impressed by her ability to see solutions where he only saw problems. "You should take on a coordination role at the foundation," Edward said suddenly, "not just as my assistant, but as someone who really makes decisions, who leads projects. You have a talent for it." Megan was speechless. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You've proven you have integrity, courage, and vision. Those are the three most important things for leading anything, and I trust you to do it. But I have no experience in foundation management. No one does when they start. But you're a quick learner, you're dedicated, and above all, you genuinely care. That's worth more than any degree." Megan felt a wave of emotion. She was being offered an opportunity she had never imagined she would have. A chance not just to work, but to make a real difference in people's lives. It was more than a job. It was a purpose. "I accept," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do my best." "I know you will." In the months that followed, Megan took on the new role with the same dedication she brought to everything she did. She began coordinating projects at the foundation, visiting hospitals, talking to doctors, listening to patients, understanding their needs. She implemented changes that streamlined processes, created support programs for patients' families, and established partnerships with universities to expand research. Edward accompanied her in everything, not as a boss, but as a partner. They worked side by side, sharing responsibilities, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficult times. And as their work grew, their relationship deepened as well. Mrs. Teresa, who finally had access to quality treatment through the very foundation her daughter was helping to coordinate, watched it all with a smile on her face. "I always knew you were special, my daughter," she would say. "The world just needed to find out too." Megan visited her mother whenever she could, bringing Edward along. He and Mrs. Teresa developed a mutual affection, and he loved listening to the stories she told about Megan's childhood. Through these stories, he discovered the source of the strength, the determination, the unshakable integrity that had made him fall in love with her. It was on a December evening, almost a year after Megan had found that wet wallet on the pavement, that Edward took her back to the foundation's garden. Christmas lights decorated the trees, and the air was cool and fragrant with the scent of flowers. He took her hand and led her to the same bench where they had first talked about their feelings. "Do you remember when you returned my wallet?" Edward asked, stopping in front of her. "Like it was yesterday," Megan replied, smiling. "You said you returned it because it wasn't yours. Simple as that. And in that moment, I knew I had found something rare. Someone who did the right thing, simply because it was the right thing, without expecting a reward, without calculating advantages. I never imagined that decision would change my entire life." Edward smiled and knelt down. Megan felt her heart stop. He took a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple but beautiful ring with a discreet diamond. "Megan Smith, you came into my life in a way I never expected. You taught me to trust again, to feel again, to live again. You are my partner, my best friend, my love, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Megan's face as she nodded, unable to speak. Edward placed the ring on her finger and stood up, pulling her into a tight embrace. They stood there holding each other under the Christmas lights, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new journey. "I love you," Edward whispered. "I love you too," Megan replied. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple but emotional ceremony in the foundation's gardens. Mrs. Teresa was in the front row, wearing a new dress and with tears of happiness in her eyes. Sonia, who had become a close friend of Megan's over time, was the maid of honor. Even Richard was there, having finally accepted that he had misjudged Megan and become one of the biggest supporters of her work at the foundation. Megan wore a simple white dress, without extravagance, just beautiful and elegant. Edward waited for her at the altar with that smile she loved, the smile that said everything without needing words. When they met, he held her hands and whispered, "You look beautiful." "And you're nervous," she teased, feeling his hands tremble slightly. "I am, but it's a good kind of nervous." The officiant began the ceremony, speaking of love, commitment, and partnership. He spoke of how true love is built through trials, through difficult choices, through moments when you decide to stay even when it would be easier to leave. And Megan and Edward knew, better than anyone, that those words were true. When it was time for the vows, Edward went first. "Megan, when you came into my life, I was lost. I had closed myself off from the world, convinced that trusting someone was a risk I couldn't afford to take. But you showed me that to live without trust is not to live at all. You gave me back more than a wallet. That day, you gave me back hope, and I promised to spend the rest of my life making you happy, supporting you and loving you with everything I have." Megan wiped away her tears and took a deep breath before speaking. "Edward, I came into your life by chance, but staying was the best choice I ever made. You gave me more than a job. You gave me a purpose, a family, a place in the world. You taught me that it's worth doing the right thing, even when it's hard, and I promise to be by your side always, in good times and bad, supporting you, challenging you, and loving you with every piece of my heart." The officiant smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Edward pulled Megan close and kissed her, as the guests applauded and cheered. It was a kiss full of promises, hopes, and true love. When they parted, he whispered in her ear, "Thank you for returning my wallet." Megan laughed, hugging him tightly. "Thank you for trusting me." The reception was held in the foundation's main hall, decorated with flowers and lights. There was food, dancing, and emotional speeches. Mrs. Teresa made a toast to her daughter, saying she always knew Megan was destined for great things. Sonia told funny stories from Megan's first days at the company, when she was clearly lost but refused to ask for help. And Edward, in his speech, thanked everyone for being there, but mostly he thanked Megan for teaching him that love is always worth it. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Megan looked around and saw smiling faces, people who had become important in her life. She saw her mother, her eyes shining with pride. She saw Sonia chatting animatedly with Richard. She saw the foundation's employees who respected and admired her for the work she did. And she realized that this was the true meaning of wealth, not having money, but having people who care. "What are you thinking about?" Edward asked, spinning her gently. "About how much has changed. A year ago I was unemployed, desperate, not knowing how I would pay the bills. And now I'm here, married to you, coordinating projects that save lives. It feels like a dream. It's real, and you deserve every second of it." Megan rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes, letting the music carry her. She thought of the wet wallet, of that split-second decision she had made. She thought of how easily she could have taken the money and followed a different path. And she was grateful from the bottom of her heart that she had chosen honesty. Because it was that choice, that moment of integrity in the midst of the storm, that had led her here, to this love, this life, this purpose. The years that followed were ones of growth, both personal and professional. Megan and Edward worked together to expand the Alistair Foundation, opening new hospitals, funding more research, reaching distant communities. Mrs. Teresa lived long enough to see her daughter become a leading figure in the field of healthcare management, invited to give lectures and speak at conferences. When she finally passed, it was in peace, knowing she had raised an extraordinary daughter. Megan carried the pain of her loss, but she also carried the lessons her mother had taught her, and she passed those lessons on to the two children she had with Edward, a boy named Peter and a girl named Helen, in honor of Edward's first wife. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, of how a lost wallet changed everything, of how doing the right thing is always worth it. And whenever Megan passed by Oxford Street, she couldn't help but look at the pavement and remember that rainy day. That moment when she held a wet wallet and decided to return it, simply because it was the right thing to do. She never imagined that decision would change her entire life, that it would lead her to true love, a greater purpose and a happiness she had never dreamed possible. Edward, for his part, never performed the wallet test again. He learned that he didn't need to test people to know who they were. He just needed to observe, listen, and trust his own instincts. And his instincts on that day when a drenched and determined Megan walked into his office had told him everything he needed to know. Together, they built not just a family, but a legacy. The Alistair Foundation became a national benchmark, saving thousands of lives and giving hope to those who had none. And at the heart of the foundation was always Megan, with her unshakable honesty, her tireless dedication, and her ability to make a real difference in the world. Because in the end, the story of Megan and Edward wasn't about a lost wallet. It was about choices, about doing the right thing when it would be easier to do the wrong thing, about trusting when everyone tells you to be suspicious, about loving even after being hurt, and about believing that sometimes the best things in life begin with a simple act of honesty on a wet pavement. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Megan and Edward has touched your heart. If you were moved, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.